Greens leader Adam Bandt. Adam Bandt, thanks so much for your time. Let me start on The Voice.
Morning. Thanks for having me on.
What do you think of Anthony Albanese's announcement? Because I know your colleague Lydia Thorpe wants him to go further.
Well, look, it's good to hear this announcement from the Prime Minister in some more detail about something that is obviously a key issue that the government wants to pursue in this Parliament. We look forward now to having discussions with the government about their proposal, why they've chosen the wording that they have, and their discussions that we'll certainly go into with an open mind, because our position, as we set out before the election, is that we'd like to see progress on all of the elements of the statement from the heart, and that includes not just voice but also truth and treaty. There's a number of issues that we'd like to put on the table in the discussions with the government, including implementation of a number of the recommendations of the Royal Commissions into deaths in custody, for example, as well as progress towards a treaty. But look, it is a good step that especially so early in the government's term, they've put on the table where they intend to go, and we welcome that, and we look forward to having discussions with the government about it.
It just seems like there's a bit of a theme early in the life of this government with you having close to the balance of power, Mr Bandt, which is you want more than the government will do, but what they will give you is much better than the coalition used to do on some of these issues. Is that a fair characterisation?
Well, look, we've got a parliament where, roughly speaking, a third of people voted for the government, a third of people voted for the opposition, and a third of people voted for someone else. And of course, in the Senate, as you're alluding to, we've now got more senators than ever before, and senators who are in balance of power. And I think part of the reason that we saw the Greens vote go up at this election is that people want us to work constructively with the new government, but to push them to do better. And that's the approach that we're taking. And I think it's going to have to be a parliament where everyone gives a bit. That's the way that we're going to get things done. And I think that you should expect to see probably a bit more of that over the course of this parliament, because I think the whole it's my way or the highway politics has been rejected by the people at the election. It's a pretty significant election where the government's vote goes backwards and the coalition's vote goes backwards and the Greens' vote goes up. That's where we're at. That's the parliament the people have chosen, and we've now got to all work with that.
Will you support the climate change bill in its current form?
Well, there'll be a vote at the end of this week in the House of Representatives, and my party room has given me authority to have discussions with the government about the bill. Our approach is to, and our preference is to see if we can improve and pass it. Those discussions haven't yet concluded, but obviously there'll be a vote on Thursday, so you can expect to hear more from us between now and then. We've been pretty clear about our concerns about the bill. I mean, aside from the target being very weak and not compliant with the Paris Agreement, we've wanted to make sure that it's a genuine floor, that it's not a ceiling, that there's some teeth in it, and also this question about new coal and gas. And now, and on a lot of areas, the government has made some changes to the bill in the way it's been introduced into the parliament, and they're changes that we welcome. We're still concerned that the government is really keen on opening new coal and gas projects, and even one of those, there's 114 on the books around the country, and even just one of those in the Beetaloo Basin in the Northern Territory would lift Australia's pollution by up to 13%. Now, if on the one hand, you're passing legislation, in the Parliament one week to say, let's talk about cutting pollution by a very low number, admittedly, and then if the next week you start opening up the Beetaloo Basin or any of the other projects, you could blow that target out of the water before the ink is even dry. And so that's something that's of concern to us.
But Anthony Albanese says he is not going to back an oil and gas moratorium. So let me put it to you, you won't be getting that. He has said he will not be shifting his 2030 target. So let me put to you, you're not getting that. It seems to me you will pass the bill regardless after trying very hard to get these other measures because they've made 43% a floor. Is that a correct assessment?
Well, you'll probably, as I say, there'll be a vote before the end of the week, and the process that we've been very upfront about is that we'll have the discussions and take a position back to my colleagues, and my colleagues in the party room will ultimately get the say about how we vote in the House and how we vote in the Senate. That's something that we'll all discuss together. There has been some shifts that have been made, but you're right. Like the government is making it very clear that they want more coal and gas, and that's, I've got to say, that's really disappointing. And I think it's ultimately a position that's untenable. And whether the government changes its mind this week, or whether it changes its mind over the coming 3 years, perhaps remains to be seen. But our Pacific Island neighbours are all saying very clearly, stop opening coal and gas. Australia wants to host a climate summit, which we welcome. At those climate summits, the push that is coming from the United States President Joe Biden, from the United Kingdom government as well, is Australia stop opening coal and gas. This position is ultimately untenable. And can I say, I think most people across the political spectrum will have different opinions about what the targets should be and how quickly to get out of existing coal and gas. But I think everyone ultimately agrees you don't make the problem worse while you're trying to fix it. You can't put the fire out if you're pouring petrol on it. So I know the Prime Minister is now recycling Scott Morrison's lines about so-called clean coal, but that is ultimately an untenable position.
Okay, just briefly, are there people in your party room who do not want you to accept the current bill? Are they putting pressure on you not to accept the current bill?
Well, look, there's a range of views in our party room, as you'd expect. And one of the good things about our Greens party room is that we have those robust discussions and we have them internally, and then we come to a consensus position. But as you'd expect, there is a range of views. And you have, again, it's not just us. It's the Pacific Islanders have said very clearly they want the government to do better. Even the idea that just being a bit less terrible than Scott Morrison will cut it is no longer washing with the people in Australia, with the rest of the world. It's not just us, is the point that I'm making, who are saying the government's got to do a lot more. It's our neighbours, it's the world community, it's the US and the UK governments, and ultimately the government at some point is going to have to shift.
Why do you think the government believes it needs this legislation, given they've already submitted the target?
Yeah, well, look, you have to ask the government that, and I know they've said that they think that this legislation will end the climate wars, and we say back, well, you don't end the climate wars by opening new coal and gas mines. So, look, having progress in Parliament and having the Parliament start to take action, in principle, we welcome that. But again, it's a question of where's the teeth? What does this compel the government to do? And one of the things that we welcome is the moves that have come during this week in the legislation that's been introduced into Parliament that mean that some government agencies are now going to start having to take climate into account for the first time. And that is a good thing, and that is a step that we welcome. But ultimately, where the rubber hits the road is what are you actually going to do to cut pollution? At the moment, broadly speaking, that's not in this bill. That's got to come at some point, and that's where the government's going to have to address this question about whether they're going to keep opening new coal and gas mines.
This target they've got, 80% renewable energy powering the power system by 2030, do you believe that will lead to higher power prices? And if that's the case, is that something Australians have to wear?
Look, I don't think that introducing more renewable energy leads to higher power prices. What we're seeing at the moment is that it's unreliable coal and expensive gas that are pushing up power prices. And we're now finding ourselves in Australian industry, households, power generation, like we're finding ourselves at the whim of the international events where a dictator launches a terrible war overseas and all of a sudden it starts biting people here at home. I think there's a very clear message that if you want to ensure that households and businesses pay less, you switch to renewables. But what does concern me about that target that you mentioned is that Labor's modelling before the election and what they've put out since is based on keeping all of the coal-fired power stations in the grid exactly the same as Scott Morrison would have done. I mean, they're not my words. That's what the government said. They said they want to keep these old, unreliable coal-fired power stations and increasingly expensive gas power stations in the system, and that none of them will close early as a result of Labor's targets.
Sure.
That's a concern. That's a recipe not just for higher pollution, but for more expensive power.
Mr Bandt, nearly out of time. Just got a couple of quick questions for you. Anthony Albanese's battled the Greens all his parliamentary life. How's your relationship with him given that?
Look, I've got over the years I'd like to think a good working relationship with the Prime Minister. I think we're able to have clear lines of communication and good conversations. We don't always agree, but that's politics. We're in different parties. But I think he's someone that on a personal level that I respect, can definitely have conversations with him. And I hope that during the course of this Parliament, where, as I said, power is shared and we are going to have to work together, that'll stand us in good stead.
And briefly, what's your view of Peter Dutton?
Look, I haven't had a chance to meet with Peter Dutton yet. I think my views about Peter Dutton and what he stands for are pretty clear. I think if the Liberal Party thinks that its way back to power is to shift further to the right with Peter Dutton as their leader, then they're going to be in opposition for a very, very long time. I think he's someone who's increasingly out of step with where modern Australia is at. People across the political spectrum want climate action. They want to see progress on a range of issues. I think if Peter Dutton were, to ever become Prime Minister, I think Australia would go backwards.
And just finally, I wanted to ask about your decision not to stand in front of the Australian flag. Is that something you've always done? I heard what you said about Indigenous people and the flag, but what about those who fought in the Second World War, for example? Isn't it a bit of an insult to them?
Look, I've got grandparents who served in both the UK and Australian Army, and I'm a regular attendee at the dawn services in and near my electorate. That's something that I take very seriously. And as the leader of the Greens, yes, there will be times where we have different views about whether Australia should be going to war. And look, we've got a very strong view that ultimately it should be the Parliament, not the government, that decides whether to put troops in harm's way. But one of the things that I've been absolutely resolute about and continue to be, both personally and on behalf of the Greens, is that whatever the decisions and discussions we may have in Parliament about whether Australia should be going to war and who should decide whether we go to war, that you have to be united in supporting our servicemen and women who then get deployed. And
so why won't you stand in front of the flag?
Whether or not you agree with the decision about the deployment, you support them, because I know that they are there.
So why won't you stand in front of the flag then?
Fighting for the country, and they deserve our support.
Sorry, Mr Bandt, why won't you stand in front of the flag?
Well, I think ultimately we need to have a discussion in this country about a republic and about the history of this country and about having a treaty, and I think I want to have a focus on those. Look, you will find me regularly in my electorate presenting the flag to schools, standing with people at citizenship ceremonies, at those kinds of services. But I think we do, on those issues about having a treaty with our First Nations people, becoming a republic, having an honest and open discussion about our history, I think that's a discussion that ultimately we need to have. And look, you're even seeing it happen with the Melbourne City Council at the moment, saying, look, let's have a discussion about what we do on Australia Day. And I think ultimately they're the kind of discussions that the community wants us to have in a respectful way.
Adam Bandt, thanks for your time.
Thanks very much, Andrew.